We thought we'd get started today talking about a little bit of background about how we got to where we are and how we approach team meetings in research and user services and another department at GW. So the Research and User Services Department, or RUSE as we call it, includes usually about 20 librarians working in a variety of areas and offering a number of services to our community. So including research support, library instruction, collection development, and services related to scholarly communication, open educational resources, and data analysis and management. Now, our department for many years had been having traditional monthly department meetings for an hour to an hour and a half, like people in many libraries and other organizations do. And these meetings definitely had value, but they weren't always the most effective means of information sharing and discussion. Of course, this is a large group of people, and the meetings weren't either occurring often enough to share things timely or really like long enough or frequent enough to really get into substantive discussion. So in the spring of 2017, which is 3 years ago, believe it or not, my co-managers and I started thinking and discussing ways we might improve the way we met. And also around this time, GW Libraries was starting to incorporate principles of agile project management into our organization and work. And a component of certain agile approaches is the practice of regular stand-up meetings. Next slide, please. So just very briefly, a little bit about Agile if you're not familiar with it. So it's a set of methods that's designed to help teams be more efficient, more effective, and make better decisions. It was originally created by the software development community, but now it's used in all different types of organizations, including many libraries. It emphasizes certain core principles and values. So things like iterative work, transparency, regular reflection, and the importance of building relationships and trust. Now, Agile is an overarching methodology, and then there are specific types of framework within it. And one of those is called Scrum. So teams using Scrum to organize their work typically have what's called a daily Scrum or stand-up meeting. These meetings are brief, and the team members do generally stand to encourage brevity. And they have a typical format in that each team member shares 3 things at each meeting: work completed since the last time the team met, work planned before the next meeting, and any impediments that team member is facing. And these frequent short meetings keep the team moving forward by regularly sharing information and quickly surfacing any issues. So that's Agile and stand-up meetings in a nutshell. Now returning to our history and our consideration of how we might improve our team meetings, both realizing that we wanted to explore ways that we might improve our meetings as well as incorporate more agile ways of working into our department, we did decide to experiment with weekly stand-up meetings in RUSE. I can talk more at the end, or one of my other colleagues can as well, about why we decided on weekly versus daily, but we did decide on weekly, and we thought it would help us achieve a number of specific goals. Next slide, please. And these included sharing useful and timely information widely, increasing opportunities for collaboration, surfacing inefficiencies and roadblocks, team building, celebrating success, which is so important, creating momentum, and being accountable to ourselves and each other. So we had our first stand-up in May of 2017, and we've had them pretty much every week since, except for breaks and things like that. So that's our current way of meeting and how it came about and why we decided to try this approach. So now I'll turn it over to my colleagues to talk in more detail about how these meetings have been working, both in RUSE as well as another department in LAI that does something similar. Thank you.
Okay, so you're probably wondering how these stand-up meetings work. Yes, it's true, we do stand up through the whole meeting. That's number one. But let me get into some other details. There are options in person, one can attend online or by cell phone. Also, there's a WebEx option. We use WebEx at the college. And WebEx, by the way, you don't have to be on. Of course, you have your on. And And Slack is also an option, especially if you're going to be away or at another conference or just unavailable physically or by video. You can Slack and let everyone know what you're doing for the week. In terms of example, we do so right now in a conference room away from departmental spaces. So has a long table, like a conference table, and it has a screen. So for example, another branch library usually participates, so they appear on the screen and we can hear them as well. And we all share by assembling around this conference table. And by the way, you don't have to have a conference table, but it helps if people bring notebooks and things like that. So who starts the meeting, you might wonder? Well, we have 3 directors and directors of research services, and typically one of them will ask, is there a volunteer who'd like to start? And so there's a moment of silence, and then someone says, okay, I'll volunteer. So that volunteer has to go first with their share, and then they're responsible for choosing the next person, and that determines whether the rules are each person has 60 cents for their share, and talking about accomplishments or compensated or anything they want to believe will be memorable for others. And once they finish their moment, they choose the next person. Next slide, please. So we know that we have a team agreement, so everybody knows what's going on for the most part. Attach the agreement to the invitation. So in our calendars, we can see that we have a meeting and the attachment is our agreement. How often people refer to the agreement, I don't know, but I'll just tell you simply what it says in 5 points. To attend all meetings using the flexible options, right time. In advance. This is important because don't prepare in advance. You might rattle, you might forget what you're going to say, or you might think about things that will be useful. So think about what you're going to say, or if you have a really good memory and you don't get nervous speaking in front of a group, then you could wing it or at least share what you memorized. Listen and don't wait your turn. So this means to be fully engaged, to be making contact, or at least is important. So you're not for clearly turn this and come up. Space until your turn. All right. We are delivering. Clearly, we all understand ALA, ACRL, but don't take it for granted that everybody in the group knows what these acronyms means. Clearly, we have people who are new to the profession, and some of them with other committees or organizations that do. So it's really nice to not use an acronym so that everybody follows along.
Okay, hi, this is Dulce Smith. I'm also from GW, and I'm a member of the Scholarly Technology Group. And I think for some folks, Monisha, your audio was cutting in a little bit in and out there. So we just might want to keep that in mind for the rest of the presentation. But can everyone hear me okay? Okay, sounds like mine's okay. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about an alternative format in which we use these stand-up meetings at GW. So I'm in a department that works closely with the research and user services group, but we're a smaller department. There's only about 5 or 6 of us, so that's a little context for this approach. But we also use the weekly stand-up meeting as a way to sort of share updates among the members of the team, bring everybody up to speed on what everyone else is working on, identify potential areas of overlap, et cetera. And we follow the same basic Scrum format that Morgan talked about. So there's sort of the backlog of things that are on the horizon. There's stuff that's in progress, and then there's the category of things that we've accomplished or done. And the main difference between our approach and the Roos approach is that we sort of supplement the oral reports with this visual aid that I've put a picture of on the slide. So we just use a whiteboard and different color-coded Post-it notes. So prior to each week's meeting, everybody sort of updates their Post-it notes to reflect the tasks they're currently working on, or the status of the various tasks they're currently working on. And this sort of gives a visible artifact that persists after the meeting. And it's a nice way to sort of help raise visibility of the work, particularly as this whiteboard is located in a shared office space that our team members share with many of the librarians, many of my colleagues in research and user services, as well as 1 or 2 other departments. So other people from other teams passing by, if they're curious, they can kind of stop and glance at the board, and that might prompt them to, raise questions of members of the team if they see something up there that potentially relates to their work. We also don't quite observe the same strictures on time that Manisha mentioned, partly because we're a smaller department. So with 5 or 6 people, it's quite easy to get through a stand-up meeting in 20 minutes, as opposed to research and user services, which is a bit larger. So I'll pass it off to Shira now.
Hey, hi everyone. So I'm going to be talking about the benefits and challenges to our weekly stand-up meetings. So just, to be clear that they're not perfect and they may not work for every group or every purpose, but they're useful to us for the following benefits, and then I'll talk about the challenges. So the weekly meetings really provide a valuable time for team building. As you all probably are aware, we all have many tasks to do each week that take us across the library or across the campus, or in these times to our homes. So we don't always have time to see each other face to face, especially as a whole department. So it's a really good time for team building and just saying hello, seeing each other's faces. It's also a good time to make announcements. So if people know of a new project or they have an update that would be useful to everyone, it's a good time to announce that. And people can also use part of their update to have a question that could be applicable to everybody. The meetings are especially beneficial for part-time or new staff in order to sort of understand the scope of what's going on in the department, especially if they, just came onto the team and, aren't familiar with everybody's role, or they're just not there for the full 40-hour week. This also increases awareness of projects that are happening, as well as what opportunities could be coming up. So if someone mentions something, you can follow up later and say, I would be interested in helping you, or I have a skill that I could apply to this, or whatever the case may be. And it also helps with transparency, so that people aren't sort of feeling like, well, I don't really know what other people are doing or what's going on in the department. And so it's not really a one-size-fits-all approach. We sort of say what we've been working on the past week and what we'll be working on the next week. But this can obviously be adapted based on goals of the group. And as Morgan actually said, we had adapted this from sort of more of a coder or developer technique of sharing updates having to do with a discrete project, but we've adapted it to having updates in our department. So likewise, there are also challenges to these kinds of meetings. And we acknowledge that there could be issues with inclusion in these kinds of meetings. So if people have any physical issue with standing up for the entire meeting, although that's not really enforced, by our group, if you need to sit, you can, but of course that could cause people to feel left out. And also the idea of timed speaking can make people nervous or be challenging for those whose first language isn't the language that the meeting is in. We've gotten a little less strict about the 1 minute sort of timer, which was sort of very prominent in the beginning, but we've sort of let people, keep themselves to time in the future or in the more recent meetings. As Morgan had also said, these aren't necessarily meetings to discuss like an issue in a very in-depth way. So those types of meetings would have to happen separately, but it's an opportunity to, have a meeting that would just be on that topic that needs to be addressed in like its own meeting. Another challenge is maintaining the team agreement. So as Monisha said, we do have the team agreement. The document is attached to the Google Calendar link of all the meeting times. But, some people forget exactly, sometimes what the goals are or the time limit or those sorts of things. So making sure that people kind of have a reminder of it is good. And also, onboarding new people into the process. And with that team agreement can be challenging. Next slide, please. So also part of the whole sort of agile philosophy is assessment. So we don't want to sort of keep doing something if it's not effective or if it could be done better. So the way that we deal with that is sort of to bake in assessment. And we've done assessment for this meeting. So what we've done, or what we had after doing this meeting for, I believe it was a year, correct me if I'm wrong, was have a retrospective. So that's the idea of looking back on what was done after a set period of time that you've hopefully agreed upon at the outset. So will we do this in a year? Will we do this in a month? And the retrospective consists of looking at and asking for feedback on what's working well, what's not working well, and what would you like to see in the future. And sort of the way we operated that was having people fill out Post-it notes and sort of put them in different sections to see what came out. This was really helpful for us to look back in the meeting, and we did end up incorporating particular feedback. So one like pretty concrete change we made was to change the meeting location. So it used to be sort of in our office area, but people found that to be distracting. So we now do it in a conference room. Of course, not now, we do it at home. Another thing we changed was instead of sort of having people randomly called on to be next, we changed it to just going around in a clockwise or counterclockwise circle around the group to sort of make it easier for everybody. So if we need to reassess this again, we could of course have another retrospective meeting to incorporate, any new changes or ideas that people have. That's it.
I do see a question in the chat.
think your audio is a little patchy, Manisha.
I could try to answer the question. I'll read it out. It says, will the short meetings make people avoid asking questions since they may feel their questions may waste others' time? So I guess there's like two kind of situations where questions could come up. So people might use, as I said, their update to ask a question that is sort of directed to everybody. And then sort of at the end of everyone's updates, then, you know, the group can kind of stick around and whoever's, you know, knowing the answer to the question could talk to that person. Or, you know, they can sort of take the question offline. So if they have a question that was prompted by somebody's update, then they could sort of ask that person after the meeting. So I guess in the sense that, would there be a back and forth discussion about a question in the context of this meeting? I guess the answer would be no. But, you know, there are opportunities to still ask questions, even if it's sort of like slightly after the meeting or with another person one-on-one.
I would add as well, to help facilitate the asking and answering of questions, we also leverage our Slack channel. So as Manisha mentioned, we use Slack, which is a messaging tool, and have a channel dedicated to our stand-up. So if a person hears something in an update that they're curious about, they could ask, like Shira said, either the person individually, or they could post it to the Slack channel. Or you know, if someone had, I think we actually decided in our retrospective maybe that if someone had like a question for the group, they would raise it in the meeting, then also post it to Slack so people could engage there. The Slack channel is also really good. People will mention, you know, especially right now, like webinars they went to or other things they've read that are useful. And the Slack channel is a great place to like post links and things like that.
There's a question in the chat about the whiteboard and the sticky notes my team uses, and how that's working during the remote period, since we're obviously not in the office. We don't really have a substitute for that per se. We have increased the incidence of the meetings to twice a week. So we have a virtual stand-up on Tuesday and Thursday now. And that, in conjunction with regular communication on Slack, is working pretty well, I think, to keep everybody up to speed. Someone mentioned Jamboard in the chat. We at GW also we use Monday.com as a project management tool. There's also Trello. So there are a number of virtual tools out there that do give you something like an approximation of the whiteboard with sticky notes. We use Monday right now more for managing specific projects as opposed to team updates, at least in my group, but I'm sure one of those could work well for that too.
Can you hear me over there?
It looks like we're still having some technical issues hearing Monisha. If anyone has any other questions, please do post them in the chat, or it's probably also okay just unmute yourself and ask as well. Let's see, I see a question did just pop up. This is a good question. I'm thinking of how this has sort of changed over time. Do you stick with 20 minutes, and what is the highest number of people who come to the meetings? I can answer that unless, all right, so I'll take that for for Roos, and then if Dulce wants to add anything for STG, as he mentioned, it works a little differently. So originally, yes, we stuck to the 20 minutes. We, as someone mentioned, you know, we actually had a timer, a visible timer that went off, and the moment you hit a minute, like that was it. And we really stuck to 20 minutes. As Shira mentioned, we have changed a little bit over time and aren't as strict with the timer and let people give slightly longer updates. So the meetings are currently going over 20 minutes for a couple of reasons. So one, we are allowing people to give a little bit more lengthy updates. There's still no more than a few minutes. Also, we do have more people joining us. So now for our weekly stand-ups in Roos, it tends to be more than just members of the Department of Roos. Also, our colleagues in specialized research collections have started joining us. So I don't know the exact number or the highest number of individuals who've been at a meeting. If any of our colleagues are on, feel free to put that in the chat. But it's probably over 20, maybe not as high as 30. But it's probably usually around 20 or so. And now with more people, slightly longer updates, as well as like being virtual, they tend to go closer to like 40, 45 minutes. And I think that's something I've personally been thinking about, like, what do we do with that? Like, do we just maintain this, especially now where we're all remote and having this weekly period of connection where everyone has so much to share and enjoys an opportunity to engage with each other? Or do we need to have a conversation about tightening back up again? Oh, there's a question. No, we do not stand up for 45 minutes. So while we were still all physically working in the building, we did keep it to 20 to 30. Now that they're this long and we're all remote, I think Monisha probably said this, but I don't know if everyone could hear her. Most people sit on their couch or their chair, wherever they're working. I know Monisha stood at least once for the stand-up, but now that we're all remote, we are sitting, which also might be why they're starting to go a little bit longer, right? Like the purpose of standing is to like encourage that brevity, and now that we're all, kind of sitting at home, that might also have us be talking longer. And I don't think I see any other questions for us. I see Monisha put out a great question for everyone here, just to hear from everyone else. So kind of hearing us talk, do any of you think you'd like to do something like this at your libraries? Or is there anyone who's trying something like this right now as well and they'd like to share their experience? And as I said, if you want to just unmute yourself and share, you're free to do so. I've had a few comments in chat. Should I just keep reading those, everyone? Sure. Okay. All right. So a couple people have shared their experience and what they think about this in their libraries. So of course, everybody can read the chat, but Audrey shares that they've had a similar model when they implemented Alma, as well as an equipment shift from our media circulation desk to our main circulation desk. Yeah, something like this, if it's not something you'd want to adopt kind of in general for a whole department. This also can be really great for specific team projects. So Alma, implementation of Alma, of course, is a great example where having a regular stand-up could really benefit a group. Kristen shares, our library is so small that meetings don't last that long anyway. Not sure it would be useful. Linda shares, we started with a 90-minute meetings once a week and then went to 60-minute meetings once every 2 weeks. Yeah, so yeah, longer model is definitely still something I think a lot of people do. Matthew shared he'd be interested in trying it at AU in his department. Really likes the idea of a post-it whiteboard. Yeah, I love Dulce's department's SDGs whiteboard for the reasons he talked about. Audrey shares that it's helpful to keep our department on par with quick changes, 30-minute meetings weekly and then every other week. Manisa shares that it allows meetings like this allow people to multitask. For example, you could do some cooking while you listen in. And she's asking whether anyone has noticed meetings are shorter now that we're working from home. Shira, Dulce, Manisha, is there anything you want to add to some of that feedback we received or questions that have come up?
I would just emphasize the point that it does represent kind of a different model, not only in terms of time, but in terms of maybe what you're bringing to the meeting. So it's not the kind of department meeting where you sort of really have dig into and hash out issues. That still probably needs a forum that's maybe more traditional. The retrospective that I think Shira talked about can be really useful for that. The stand-up is really more about sharing work in progress. And I think we did find initially when we went that direction, there can be some discomfort people have if they're not really used to that as a project management tool, generally speaking, not just for a department meeting, but because it does require you to sort of take on a little more vulnerability with respect to work that's, not really finished, to say, well, I'm still working on this or I'm stuck on this, and that can be an initial barrier for some people. But the benefit of that then is that it does, I think, help give greater visibility to sort of all the work that's going on, so that people are aware of what their colleagues are doing, which wasn't always the case before we moved to this model where we had more traditional department meetings where, there would be a substantive issue or substantive issues on the agenda, but not as much of a chance for people to just update everyone else on what they're doing. So just wanted to kind of point that out.
Yeah, I mean, I would also add that, it's something that's useful also if there's a lot of changes happening. So this isn't really like a stand-up meeting, but, we started having weekly meetings with our Dean of Libraries, having to do with like what are the changes happening with like policies and everything once we all went to remote work. And those were only scheduled for 15 minutes. So those were sort of more just like an update that she gave or the AUL would give, and then time for questions. So it's sort of, I guess the idea is like these kind of short meetings, they don't have to be like any particular way, but they can be adapted to what your goals are for any particular time period.
And I see Monisha sharing in the chat kind of one thing that maybe doesn't work as well now that we're all remote in these meetings is, of course, body language, right? When we're all standing together in a room, right, there's that additional component of communication that's missing, potentially even if you do have your video on. And most people, since we've gone virtual, do have video on, but not always for a variety of reasons. And someone has shared in the chat, one of our colleagues, yeah, just kind of seconding, with whether it's stand-up meetings or any meetings you're having remotely, right? There's additional challenges to being remote in terms of communicating. So I think I would just add to that, even if you're not doing a stand-up, if you're doing a different model, I think making some conscious choices about your goals. So having a team agreement like we talked about for how we wanted to hold our meetings, having reflections that can be really valuable, whatever your meeting format. And if anyone's interested in seeing the full team agreement, you can contact any one of us and we'd be happy to share it. It's kind of like goals, guidelines, logistics, like the WebEx link, stuff like that. All right, we have a few minutes left and Monisha has another question for everyone. She's wondering, does anyone know already, would this not work for your department? So kind of each person sharing, even the supervisor every week. So I think we heard from one person who felt, kind of given the nature of their meetings, this wasn't for them. Anyone else hearing about this and just feeling that it's not the right fit for you? Or any other questions or anything anyone wants to share?
Hi, this is Laura Rubel. I'm in GW in the Scholarly Technology Group along with Dulce. And one thing I wanted to add to the conversation about having a post-it note board like we have, in addition to making things very visible about what we're working on, you might have noticed that one of the columns on the far right was done. So it's really kind of satisfying as a team to see your post-it notes kind of move over to done. And then, each week that kind of pile of finished completed work accumulate. So it doesn't have to be a post-it note board, a sticky note board. It could be a virtual board where you have virtual tickets that kind of move across and are visible in that way. So that's something I've really appreciated about the board, getting that sense of accomplishment over seeing things get done.
Thank you, Laura. I think that's a great example of celebrating success in terms of these meetings, right? Like, I think it's a lot more fun. It's a lot more interesting. It's a lot more celebratory and team building, I think anyway, than it may sound. And I think Laura's example of a visual representation of all the work your team has accomplished, both as a team and as individuals, is a really great component of working in this way. All right. So we have the 5-minute warning from Joel, and Monisha posted a good question that I think I might ask Shira if she'd like to start us off answering, since she alluded to this a little bit and kind of some of the challenges. So Monisha asks, what if some people are really private? What should they do in kind of approaching joining a meeting like this?
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe different definitions of private versus like if they're shy, like about talking in front of everybody versus like, you know, the idea of I don't want to, as Dulce alluded to, like I don't want to talk about everything I'm like working on because it's not done, or I don't want somebody to be like, why isn't it happening faster or something like that. So I guess in one sense, it's kind of about like getting used to the format and maybe making sure everyone kind of agrees that like this isn't an example, this isn't a moment for like judging people or like being like I'm doing more stuff this week than you are. I guess like it's kind of trying to like create a time of like feeling safe, I guess, in the group, or like creating a feeling of safety among the group. And so that could be like in your team agreement that like, you know, this is sort of a judgment-free zone, or like a, you know, depending on, you know, being clear that the goals aren't like we're surveilling you and we want to do what know what you're doing like every minute, and we're like, you know, saying you haven't done enough this week, like that's not the purpose of the meeting. Like that it's more, you know what I'm saying, that it's more like we want to hear from you and we care about what you're doing, and we want to know if you need help, or we want to know if you hit a roadblock, or we want to know if you need support from someone else. So I guess it's like, it's hard to say what to do if people feel shy about like public speaking, but I would say like just trying to make an effort to make the meeting like a supportive place for people. I don't know if anybody has other ideas.
Dulce, Monisha, it looks like we have a minute if either of you want to add any final thoughts.
I would say it's helped me as a discipline to think about what the story in my work tells, you know, which I think is important. You know, given everything that Shira said, which I think is absolutely right about it ideally about it working best when it's sort of a safe space. In addition to that, the practice of thinking about how you're going to kind of summarize what you're working on and your current priorities for your colleagues, I think it helps, at least it's helped me sort of cultivate that perspective on my work, and helped me think about how other people would perceive my priorities, and in some cases even helped me evaluate what should really be a priority at the moment.
Monisha, do you want to see if your audio is working and you can finish this up for us?
Okay. It seems like when I laugh, I see the yellow light. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. I just want to say that when I first started at GW in 2015, I was part-time. And so these stand-up meetings really made me feel like I was part of the group. I was finding out what we were doing, and I was able to get to know people through shares. It's really good for new people. Someone says I broke up.
All right. Peter's wondering if you could type your closing thoughts, Monisha. And then I'll read them out. And let's see, so Monisha's sharing that when she started part-time, It really helped her get to know what others were doing, so that it didn't feel like it would take years to get to know my colleagues. And Monisha says, thank you for coming. So thank you, everyone. And again, our information is here. Please feel free to contact Monisha. Thank you, Monisha, who organized this panel today, or any one of us with questions. And thank you for being here.